Greetings. I've been doing these short clips looking at the friendship and the ministry of Dr. Martyn Lloyd Jones and Reverend Ieuan Phillips, his dear friend and foot soldier in the gospel ministry, also brother-in-law, and looking at actually personal items from the family to give us insight to these things. In this book right here, as I've shared before, is like a scrapbook. Let's just call it that. It's a scrapbook. Whoever was collecting these things was like keeping track of how God was moving within the family. And, you know, my last message, I just wasn't all that pleased with it. And so I want to try to do a little bit better job this time and share with you the story behind the story. So quickly, in 1927, the doctor leaves Harley Street to the pulpit in Aberfan Wells. So he goes from what's going to be a prosperous career as a doctor to be a poor minister in Aberfan Wells and perhaps never to be heard from again. And in this article, it was just really sweet, if you remember, where the person who's meeting with the doctor says, "I'm really kind of surprised that you're going to leave the medical profession to become a minister." And the doctor said, "Really? Don't you believe in the gospel in which you preach? Can you really be surprised?" You know? And so that's 1927. Now, what we have here is this article, which we covered last time. Let me flip this over. And it's published by the Herald of Wells on Saturday, January 20th, 1934. The New Acts of the Apostles at Aberfan Church. So Dr. Martyn Lloyd Jones in his church. Again, there's the photo. So this reporter is hearing something wonderful has happened in Aberfan Wells, and it's going to go and travel there. And it was a dreary and rainy day, and there is a presbytery meeting. And in the article, it starts off by how those that are bemoaning the state of the church, that churches are empty, but not so in Aberfan Wells, even in this, that it's not necessarily a place that you would think would be great success, but all of a sudden there is church growth within this Calvinistic Methodist chapel. And what you read in there is that things have really picked up, right? In terms of church membership, the church is financially strong now. It is active, it is alive. And a gentleman stands up and says, "All the ist are being saved. All the ist are being saved." And that would be the atheists and the spiritualists and the drunkists. You know, all the ist are wonderfully being saved. And another elder speaks about all the activities within the church, and whether it's the men or women's Bible studies or the prayer meetings, the service that the church is doing. It's a church full of life and activity. It's a church that can stand on their own because these people have come to faith in Jesus Christ. And during the prayer meeting, I think they would meet Mondays at 7:15, talk about sometimes those prayer meetings would go 2 to 3 hours. And 40 different people might pray in this prayer meeting. And if I remember correctly, 200 to 300 people would show up. And one gentleman who was working in the iron ore speaks about how he comes and he's tired and he's fatigued, but by the end of the prayer meeting, he's completely refreshed. And they make a comment that Lloyd Jones said that he had to, as the minister, he had to be to put a stop to things, meaning that in other words, he had to hold people back sometimes, so what a wonderful, actually didn't stop. He said it was a break, I think. That's what it was. I have to be a break sometimes. I have to slow people down a little bit because they're on fire for the Lord. Wouldn't that be a wonderful problem if every minister had said, "Oh, my congregation, they're so in love with the Lord, and they want to serve him and bring him glory and preaching the gospel and doing this and that." And sometimes it just becomes a disorganized mess. So the doctor has to bring some structure to things once in a while, has to put a break on some things once in a while, just get everybody organized, just a little bit. And they ask, what is the secret to this church? What's the secret? He says, they surrender. They surrender to God. Well, that's an overview, right? And so I wanted to kind of capture the mountain peaks of the article. But now I want to tell the story behind the story and where you can find it. So in the Martyn Lloyd-Jones biography, volume 1, and if I remember correctly, I told everyone that that the church began with roughly about 200 people on the rolls, but maybe 75 to 100 would show up. And that seems about right, because here it says in 1929, conversions had become a regular feature of the life of the church at Aberfan. So I want to give the story behind the story. Church membership had steadily increased from 146. So my number of 200, but normally 75 to 100 attended, that kind of hunts. And because they had to clean up the rolls, because out of those 200, if only 75 or 100 are showing up, then about maybe 75 to 100 are really true members, right? And but had increased from 146 to 165 at the end of 1927, and then to 196 at the end of 1928. So we're starting to see some growth now. If we look here, by November 2nd, had grown from 248 to 311. And listen to this. By the date, the number of those who were coming to saving knowledge of Christ from outside the church was remarkably increasing. Some of them being among the 44 who baptized had just noted. Church membership in 1930 was to increase by 88, of which number 70 were recorded as from the world. Now just stop and think about that for a moment. So I see November 2nd, 1930. The article that I was reading from was from 1934. But what's happening here? Well, 88 increase, and 70 were from the world. They weren't consolidating Christians like we are now, right? Like churches are growing because other churches are shutting down, or perhaps churches become liberal, and so Christians are having to find themselves. My church isn't acting like a Christian church anymore, so I'm going to go to a healthy church, to a Bible-believing church, to a God-fearing church. We're consolidating, but here, people are coming from out of the world, new conversions, out of the devil's camp, if you will. Quite remarkable, right? And one of these individuals' name is Harry Wood. And I want to tell the story, and again, you can find it in page 211 of the biography, but that goes back to, this article, because by 1934, tremendous growth, right? Well, Harry Wood was gainfully employed, but he lost his job, and so he didn't have a lot going for him. But he was once he got saved and coming out of the world, he was just so committed to the Lord. And he had very good spiritual insight. He would have several conversations with Dr. Martyn Lloyd-Jones, and the doctor was just impressed in this man and his new faith in Christ and how well he matured in his insight. And he was a sensitive man. He was sensitive to the things that were around him. Well, it's a Good Friday service. And at the end of the service, which was incredibly sweet, the doctor can see that Mr. Wood just looked down. And he asked Harry, he said, "Well, what's wrong, brother?" And Harry said, "It was such a powerful, sweet time, doctor. I was just, hoping that maybe the Lord takes me home. I want to go home." And that stuck with the doctor. And a couple weeks go by. It's Monday night, prayer meeting, the one that's mentioned in 1934, the one that has hundreds of people coming. At this time, in the size of the church, maybe it's 75, 100 people coming to a Monday night. It was always very well attended. And the doctor always opened up the prayer meeting by asking somebody to read some scriptures, and I think Ieuan Murray points out that the doctor probably knew that Harry had many things on his heart, so he asked Harry to go ahead and stand and share some scriptures, which he did. And I think he read from John's Gospel, I think chapter 17, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, John 17. You know, the high priestly prayer. And so Harry's reading, and once he's done, he sits down in the pew right in front of the doctor, and he has this like large, loud exhale, and he falls to the ground in this Monday night prayer meeting, and he yields up his spirit, and he dies right there. Doctor's not able to save him. The doctor ends the meeting in prayer. And there they are. They got their brother Harry's dead on the floor. Well, when the funeral comes, and I think I'm either getting this out of the biography, or the story comes from the Memories of Sandfields by Beth Ann Lloyd Jones. It may come out of here, or there might be another book that I got this bit of information from. Is when he died and they had the funeral service at the church, they carried his body to the graveyard, through the town, to the cemetery. And God apparently used that to stir people up, saying, you know what? I'm not going to live forever. I do have a soul. Eternity is at stake. So here's this little church. Brother dies in a prayer meeting. Funeral comes. They have the funeral service, and their soul, and they're, you know, it's a time of grief and loss and sorrow, because this is the effects of sin, right? Causing death, the ruinous effects of sin. So they carry the brother's casket to the cemetery, through the town. And God uses that. And that was one of the events that is captured that says that God used that in order to continue the growth at Aberfan Wells. And so I wanted to, again, my goal in this message, I'm going to stop now, was to give you like the peaks of the story, right, of the articles, but then also kind of give you at least one of the background stories. Is, well, how did God move, and what instruments did he use? And, well, a whole variety of things, including a brother who wanted to go home, and the Lord says, I'm bringing you home. Harry, you're coming home. And then God uses that funeral service to stir people's mind, to get them to think about eternity. And that would continue the growth of Aberfan Wells and this wonderful ministry of Dr. Martyn Lloyd Jones. Well, I hope these things have been uplifting. Again, it's been my goal, whatever is true, whatever is pure, whatever is heavenly, to set our minds on these things. And I hope you enjoyed this story, and that it would cause you to explore more, right? And books are so precious. Well, until next time, grace upon grace be with you all.